Hi, you're on the Reddit Confessions channel. I booked the table 6 weeks in advance. Corner seat, low lighting, string quartet, her favorite. I even paid extra to have our song played right after dessert. Dumb, I know, but when you've been ignored for 30 days straight, you start clinging to gestures like they're life rafts. The waiter looked nervous when he set the champagne down. I guess it's awkward watching a guy sit alone on his anniversary, checking the door every time it swings open, pretending he's not about to break. She didn't come, didn't call, didn't text. She was active on social media, though. I saw her post a blurry picture of a cocktail with the caption, "Self-care night, nail polish sparkles. She never drinks alone." That's when I knew. And yet, I stayed seated. All the way through dinner. I chewed each bite like I was proving something. Like my dignity was baked into the mashed potatoes. When the violinist came by to play Can't Help Falling in Love, I nearly laughed. She picked that song for our first dance. Said it gave her goosebumps. Now it just gave me nausea. By the time the bill came, I'd memorized every crack in the wood grain of the table. I left a tip bigger than I should have, because the waiter didn't say a word. Not when I ordered for two. Not when I pushed her untouched steak aside. Not even when I asked him quietly, "Do people usually come back from this?" He just nodded. The kind of nod people give when they don't know the answer. Outside, my phone lit up. "Clarice." No greeting. No apology. Just, "Where the hell are you?" She sounded offended. Like I ruined the day. I looked up at the sky. Clouds moving too fast. Like they didn't want to stick around for the storm. And I said it clearly, "I don't celebrate disrespect." Then I hung up. But the silence that followed, that was just the beginning. When I got home that night, the lights were off. Not a single one. The house was completely dark. Eerily silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. Like it was mocking me with every second that had passed without her showing up. Her car wasn't in the driveway. No note on the table. No apology text waiting on my phone. Nothing. Just the residue of a ruined night clinging to my clothes. I wasn't even angry at that point. That would have taken too much energy. I just stood there in the doorway for a while, listening to the emptiness, wondering how long it had been since this house felt like home. Then, without thinking, I wandered into the guest room. We hadn't used it in years, but something pulled me there. The bed was made perfectly, too perfectly, and there was a faint trace of perfume in the air. Not the kind she wore around me. This one was heavier, sweeter, foreign. I opened the closet. Inside, a small overnight bag sat on the floor, half-zipped, with a sweater I'd never seen before spilling out. It was definitely hers, but it wasn't hers. You know what I mean? Like it belonged to a version of her I didn't recognize anymore. There was also a keyring. One of those ones with the leather tag and the tiny flashlight attached. It wasn't hers. It was a man's. And the second I picked it up, my chest went cold. She had someone else's keys in our house. I should have stopped there. I should have just walked away. But something cracked open in me. I started checking drawers, cabinets, the nightstand, and that's when I found it. Tucked inside a book I once gave her for our anniversary. A book she never read. A folded receipt. From a boutique hotel 3 towns over. 2 nights. 1 room. The check-in date? 2 weeks ago, right in the middle of her work trip. I remember sinking onto the bed, the receipt still clenched in my fist, just breathing in that perfume like it could somehow answer the million questions racing through my head. I don't know how long I sat there, but at some point the garage door opened. Her car was back. She walked in like she hadn't just missed our anniversary dinner, like the world hadn't shifted. She didn't notice the lights were still off, or that my shoes were by the guest room. She didn't even call out my name. She just went straight upstairs, humming, like nothing had happened. I stood there in the dark, clutching the receipt, waiting for my heart to stop pounding. And that's when I realized she wasn't hiding anymore. Not really. She just didn't care if I found out. That kind of indifference, that's what shatters you. And I hadn't even told her yet that I knew. I was still deciding how to break. I didn't confront her that night. I wish I could say it was because I was being strategic or patient, but the truth is, I froze. like a deer in the headlights of my own marriage. I lay in bed beside her, pretending to sleep while she scrolled on her phone with a faint grin on her face. That smile. It wasn't mine. I hadn't seen that version of it in months, and now here it was, glowing in the dark like it had never left. Only it had just moved on to someone else. I stared at the ceiling, numb, while her thumb tapped rhythmically against the screen. I could hear the swipes, the muffled giggle she tried to suppress. She was texting someone. Probably him. The guy with the spare key. The guy who stayed in that boutique hotel with her while I was picking up dry cleaning and meal prepping like a good little husband. I remember turning my face toward the window, biting my lip until it nearly bled just to keep from saying something. She turned off her phone eventually and rolled away from me, taking all the warmth with her. The next morning was worse because she acted like nothing had happened. She asked if I wanted coffee, told me I looked tired, said it must be the stress from work. I nodded, played along, trying to figure out if she was testing me or if she truly believed I was that blind. I watched her as she stood barefoot in the kitchen, making her smoothie, singing under her breath like she hadn't just demolished everything sacred between us. She kissed me on the cheek before she left for the office. I flinched. She didn't notice, but I noticed everything, and I had questions. Lots of them, but I didn't want answers from her anymore. I wanted facts. Cold, undeniable facts. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I called someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Hugo, an old friend from college who now worked in digital forensics. Back in the day, we used to joke about privacy being a myth. Now I needed that myth torn apart. Hugo wasn't surprised by the call. He'd seen enough marriages implode to recognize the tone in my voice. He said he could help me, but warned that I needed to be sure I wanted the truth. I told him I didn't have a choice. He gave me a burner app to install, something that would clone texts and track locations quietly. I hated the idea of spying. It made me feel like a villain in my own story. But when you've been lied to this thoroughly, trust dies fast. Within 48 hours, I had access to her texts. Not all of them, just the recent stuff. Enough to punch a hole straight through my chest. There were messages from someone saved as M. That was his only initial. He called her darling and my brave little liar. He talked about her perfume, the same one I smelled in the guest room. They joked about me, called me Mr. Routine, said I'd never figure it out. She even wrote, "He still thinks I'm just tired. Bless him. Bless him." Like I was some pitiful child playing husband. It was in that moment that everything shifted. I wasn't sad. I wasn't shocked. I was hollow, like I'd walked through fire and felt nothing. I realized Clarice had already left the marriage. She just hadn't bothered to pack. The day I stopped pretending everything was fine was the same day she suggested we have dinner together. Just the two of us. I'd just gotten home from work, and she was already in the kitchen, humming to herself, stirring a pot like we were some postcard version of a married couple. She turned to me with a practiced smile and said, "You've been so tense lately. I thought we could reconnect tonight. Just a nice meal and no phones." For a moment, I wondered if she somehow knew that I knew. But her eyes, they were too calm, too sure of herself. I agreed, of course. I didn't even hesitate. But inside, I was screaming. I was seconds away from showing her the messages, from asking who M really was, from throwing the hotel receipt on the table like a courtroom exhibit. But I didn't. I kept it all in because now I wasn't chasing answers. I was collecting evidence. I wanted to see how far she'd go, how much she'd lie while looking directly into my eyes. She made her specialty. Some ridiculous balsamic chicken dish she used to cook when we first got married. The same dish she stopped making once she started working late. The irony wasn't lost on me. She poured 2 glasses of wine, lit a candle, and told me to sit. I sat. I smiled. I thanked her like a man who wasn't on the verge of collapse. She started with small talk, asked how my day was, told me hers was exhausting, and then laughed, actually laughed, about how her boss was giving her way too many responsibilities. I nodded, chewing slowly, wondering if M was that boss, wondering if that's where they met. Every word out of her mouth felt like a knife with a bow on it. But I kept going because I needed her to hang herself with her own stories. And she did. Halfway through dinner, her phone buzzed. It was on the counter behind her. She didn't flinch, just kept smiling at me, like nothing existed outside our little dinner bubble. I asked her, calmly, "Aren't you going to check that?" She shook her head and said, "Nope, tonight's about us. Whoever it is can wait." It buzzed again. I excused myself to get more wine from the kitchen, but instead I leaned just enough to see the screen light up. Can't wait for tomorrow. I'm still thinking about last night. You're evil in the best way." She'd pinned the conversation. That made it worse somehow, like she wanted to be reminded of him every time she opened her phone. I returned to the table with the wine. My hands were shaking, but I don't think she noticed. She was too busy talking about how we should take a weekend trip sometime soon. "Remember that lake cabin?" she said, her voice dripping with nostalgia. "We could go back there, get away from the noise." I stared at her for a long second and finally asked, "Who do you talk to when I'm not around?" She blinked, just once, then smiled again. "What do you mean?" I shrugged. "You've seemed distracted lately." She reached across the table and touched my hand, and I wanted to recoil. "It's just work stress, that's all. You know how it is." She squeezed. "But I love you, Lo. You know that, right?" I didn't answer, couldn't, because in that moment, looking into her eyes, I realized she wasn't just lying to me. She was convinced I'd never leave, and that told me everything. The next morning, I watched her put on makeup in the bathroom mirror like it was just another Wednesday. She stood there humming again, applying mascara with slow, delicate strokes, completely unaware that I was leaning in the doorway behind her. Her reflection didn't match the person I used to know. Same face, same hands, same hair. But there was this detachment, like she wasn't wearing her own skin anymore, like she'd become a polished version of herself that only existed for someone else. She caught my gaze in the mirror and smiled, but it wasn't for me. It was the same smile I'd seen her give to strangers, to clients, to waiters. Not warm, just polite, surface level, disposable. "You're up early," she said, reaching for her earrings. "Couldn't sleep," I mumbled. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. Then she asked if I wanted her to pick up anything on the way home. I almost laughed. My wife, who hadn't remembered our anniversary, who skipped intimacy like it was an optional feature in our marriage, was offering to buy milk like everything was fine. I told her no, and she left with a kiss on my cheek that might as well have been a stamp marked expired. The second the front door clicked shut, I felt it again, that nausea. The kind you get when you're trapped inside something you can't claw your way out of. The walls of our home felt like they were pulsing, alive, lying. I sat at the kitchen table with her coffee cup still warm and opened the burner app. I hadn't checked it since the night of the dinner. Maybe I hoped it would all stop, that she'd wake up with regret and confess, that I wouldn't have to see it. But she didn't stop. In fact, she leaned into it harder. There were photos, not graphic but intimate in a way that hurt worse. Him holding her hand in a bookstore. Her kissing his cheek in front of a mural we once took pictures at during our honeymoon. She was recreating memories with him, moments that were supposed to belong to us. But that wasn't the worst part. There was an audio message. I shouldn't have pressed play. I know that, but I did. Her voice filled my ears, soft and airy. The version of her I hadn't heard in years. "He's starting to ask questions," she said. "But don't worry. He won't do anything. He never does. It's kind of sad. He thinks love is enough." I sat there, paralyzed, the words echoing like they were carved into my bones. He won't do anything. And she was right. Up to that point I hadn't. I'd just taken it. Every lie, every excuse, every little betrayal. I made dinner. I paid the bills. I kissed her goodnight while she crafted alibis for stolen afternoons. But something in me cracked then. Not a loud snap, not an explosion. It was quiet, cold, permanent. I stood up, dumped her coffee in the sink, and walked into the guest room. The same one where I found that overnight bag. I pulled it out again, checked the pockets, the lining, every corner. I needed more. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Closure? Proof? Maybe some twisted confession she left behind out of guilt? Instead, I found a receipt from a jewelry store. Not the one we used. Somewhere downtown. The date was 3 days ago. And the line item? Custom men's bracelet. Initials engraved. CNM. She was giving him gifts. And I was the fool refilling the toothpaste. That bracelet, the one with their initials engraved, burned a hole in my pocket all day. I didn't even know what to do with it. I stared at it while sitting in my car outside my office, pretending to be early for work when in reality, I'd been parked there for 40 minutes, rereading the receipt over and over. CNM. Clarice and who? Max? Mason? Marcus? Whoever he was, he had something now that was meant to be intimate. Something permanent. And he had it wrapped around his wrist, probably clueless that I now knew more than either of them wanted. I couldn't concentrate at work. Every email, every phone call sounded like static. I started seeing flashes in my head. Her hands on him. Her lips whispering in someone else's ear. Her eyes lighting up for a man that wasn't me. What tore at me most wasn't even the infidelity itself. It was how good she had gotten at pretending. How easily she wore the mask. I'd been sleeping next to a performance artist, and I hadn't even seen the curtain drop. That night, I got home before she did. I decided I wouldn't speak first. I wouldn't even look at her unless she gave me a reason to. She walked in humming again, casual, breezy, like she had music in her bloodstream and not secrets. I watched her from the hallway as she dropped her bag on the couch and kicked off her heels. Then, she did something that stopped my breath. She took a small box from her coat pocket. Jewelry-sized, delicate. She smiled at it like it held a universe. My stomach turned. I thought she was going to hide it. But instead, she opened it and pulled out a keychain. Just a basic leather strap with a metal tag. She turned it over in her hand. I couldn't see what was written on it, but I had a sinking feeling it wasn't mine. I stepped into the room slowly. "What's that?" She jumped. "God, Lowell, you scared me." "What's on the keychain?" I asked calmly. She closed it quickly and slipped it into her purse. "Just something I ordered for myself." "Let me see it." She hesitated. That half-second pause gave her away more than anything she could have said. "It's stupid. Just something inspirational. You know, like those silly quotes I love." "Then why hide it?" She blinked. "I wasn't hiding it." We stood there for a moment, the weight of her lie thickening the air between us. I didn't press her. Not yet. I just watched her turn away and go upstairs. Like it was all fine. Like we weren't seconds from collapse. Later that night, she said she had to go in early the next morning for a client breakfast. I asked who the client was. She said it was a new account. I asked for the name. She said it didn't matter. I didn't argue. I just nodded and smiled. I'd already seen the name in her texts earlier that day. It matched one of the recent messages. Can't wait to see you before work. Wear the navy skirt. You know what it does to me." She wore that skirt to bed. Not for me. And the next morning, when she left in a hurry and kissed me goodbye with lips that still tasted of someone else's promises, I didn't wave. I didn't say, "I love you." I just watched the door close. Then I picked up the burner phone, snapped photos of every message, every voice note, every thread that spelled out the truth I already knew. Because I wasn't planning a confrontation anymore. I was planning my exit. I spent the next 4 days quietly gathering pieces of my life and hiding them in plain sight. Not clothes or personal things, those could be replaced. I'm talking about the real valuables. Documents, passwords, account details, backups. The stuff she would never think to look for because she thought I wasn't capable of action. And maybe before, she would have been right. I was the man who brought flowers instead of arguments, who apologized for things I didn't do just to keep peace. But something had broken inside me. Quietly. Permanently. Every morning she left with a kiss and a lie. And every night she came home wearing the perfume I once bought her. Now for another man. I never asked where she'd been. I didn't need to anymore. The truth was no longer hidden. It was living right in front of me, wearing her face, using my Wi-Fi, sleeping in my bed. On the fifth night, I followed her. I waited 15 minutes after she left for her late work meeting, then got in my car and tailed hers. She was careful, but not enough. She took the highway toward the city, got off 3 exits early, and parked at a dimly lit corner near a trendy little restaurant that I knew she'd never take me to. Too modern for her tastes, she once said. I watched her as she checked herself in the mirror, reapplied her lipstick, and stepped out. Not a glance back. I didn't follow her inside. I didn't need to. A few minutes later, he pulled up. Mid-30s, cocky walk, navy suit. She lit up when she saw him. I watched them through the glass. Laughing, touching hands over the table. Her body language screaming familiarity, desire, betrayal. Then she handed him a small black box. The bracelet. He kissed her hand. She leaned in and whispered something that made him smile like a man who thought he'd won. They toasted. I drove away. I didn't wait to see how the night ended. I already knew. Instead, I went home and opened the shared laptop we kept in the office. The one she thought I barely touched. I opened a hidden folder I had created the night after I found that receipt. The folder filled with screenshots, audio clips, message logs, GPS pins. I compiled everything into one simple file, titled it Sinem, while I watched. Then I emailed it to myself. Twice. Once to my personal account. Once to a fresh burner I created for one reason only, to deliver it. Not to her. To her boss. Her parents. A lawyer. And one other person she wouldn't expect. Her best friend, Margot. The one who used to whisper to her, "You're lucky to have him." Because Margot deserved to know the woman she trusted with her secrets was a fraud. And because Margot's husband was also named Marcus, the same name that popped up in a few texts that didn't make sense until now. I didn't know for sure, but Clarice was sloppy. She stopped caring who she hurt because she never thought I'd fight back. But I wasn't fighting. I was disappearing. When she came home that night, I was already asleep. Or pretending to be. She kissed my forehead. Her lipstick still smelled like someone else's mouth. She turned off the lights, crawled in beside me, and whispered, "I love you, Lo." I stayed still, because the final part of my plan, it would unfold tomorrow. The next morning, I was gone before she opened her eyes. But not just out the door. I was gone from the lease, from the bills, from the bank accounts, from the shared life she'd been desecrating piece by piece. I'd moved quietly over the course of the week, shifting funds, consulting a lawyer, setting up a new place in another city under my own name only. I'd even left the car she used registered solely to her, complete with the upcoming insurance payment and maintenance bill. Fitting, I thought. Let her explain the overdue oil change to Marcus. On the kitchen counter, I left one single envelope. Inside was a printed photo of her and Marcus holding hands outside the restaurant. The receipt for the hotel room, a copy of the bracelet invoice, and a sticky note, written in my neatest handwriting. "You were right, I wouldn't do anything, so I did everything instead." I blocked her number before I reached the highway. The silence that followed wasn't painful, it was peaceful. I didn't want a screaming match, or some grand confrontation where she'd twist herself into another performance. I didn't need an apology, I just needed out. And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt light. Not happy. Not yet. But light. Like I dropped a bag of bricks I didn't realize I was carrying. Later that day, the files went out. Every one of them. Her boss got a copy. So did her parents. And Margot. I didn't add a message. No caption. Just the facts, laid bare. Let them ask the questions she didn't want to answer. Within hours, she called from unknown numbers. I didn't answer. I didn't need to hear her spiral. My silence was the only closure I'd allow. I started a new job 2 weeks later. It's a quiet, smaller company, no drama. I'm renting a tiny one-bedroom with a balcony that overlooks a park. The first thing I did was buy a candle, same scent I once lit for her. But this time I burned it just for me. Because here's the thing no one tells you. Betrayal isn't just about what someone does to you. It's also about who they turn you into. And I didn't like who I had become. Begging for scraps, rationalizing neglect, pretending loyalty still meant something. Now I choose peace, even if it means being alone for a while, even if it means rebuilding from the ground up. Because starting over, when done right, is not a tragedy. It's a liberation. Thanks for watching this story on Reddit Confessions. Have you ever witnessed someone rebuild their life after betrayal, or done it yourself? Share a powerful historical moment of resilience in the comments. Your insight could inspire someone else right now. And don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories, right here on Reddit Confessions.